Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Omni Athlete. You're here because, like us, you believe that sport is a vehicle for elevating global consciousness. But you know that elevating consciousness through sport only matters if it actually helps you to compete at your highest level. We created this show to empower your performance with the wisdom and ideas of the world's highest achieving mind, body, and spirit competitors. Okay, so today's guest is a body-mind teacher, energizing keynote speaker, entrepreneur, former pro skater for Team Rollerblade, and the best-selling author of On The Verge, Wake Up, Show Up, and Shine. As you'll quickly recognize from her laundry list of accolades, thousands of followers, and endorsements from some of the world's leading coaches and thinkers on peak performance, our guest is on a mission to help the world shift out of doing and into being. After experiencing the power of life in flow during her final collegiate race as a runner and shattering her previous records in the process, she began a systematic and dedicated pursuit of uncovering the true potential of the human experience, a journey that has literally touched the lives of thousands of students. As a consultant, speaker, and coach, she counts the likes of World Bank Group, Goldman Sachs, SAP, Wells Fargo, Yale University, Villanova University football, and men's basketball as clients. She's the founder of Verge BodyMind in Philadelphia and host of the weekly podcast series On The Verge. She's a frequent blogger and contributor to the Huffington Post and Mindful magazine, and was recently named by Mindful as one of their 30 Mindfulness Thought Leaders. It's my pleasure to introduce to Omni Athlete the author of the book that NCAA basketball national championship head coach for the Villanova Wildcats Jay Wright has called a must-read for anyone who is passionate about peak performance at home, work, and at play, Cara Bradley. Welcome to the show, Cara.
Wow, Josh, that was awesome. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, honestly, it's good to have you.
You did a really nice job on that intro. You brought in some elements that normally, aren't kind of put together. So I appreciate that. Excellence. Thank you.
Thank you. And it was a lot of fun preparing for the show. I found myself going down some really, really energizing rabbit holes, so to speak, just, as one off the cuff. Rollerblading and the environment around professional roller skating is absolutely incredible to me. Would you mind if we just start there and share a little bit of what that experience was like for you? Because I found it super fascinating just exploring that world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny when, they always say, youth is wasted on the young. I don't know if that's exactly what's said, but I was such a young punk in New York City when this all came about. I was in my early 20s. I wasn't that young, but I was a figure skater. I was a competitive figure skater, and I was skating in New York City, and I had one of my first companies was a figure skating apparel line called Blade Skatewear, because I wasn't into all the frilly stuff that skaters practiced in. I wanted cool stuff. So somehow I designed a line of very simple Lycra. Like Lycra was the big new thing back then. So I designed this line of skatewear. Well, one of my accounts was right on Central Park, pretty much right on Central Park. And he started selling these skates called rollerblades and inline skates. And he asked me if I'd be interested in teaching a rollerblade class, inline skating class, in Central Park on Saturday mornings for people who bought skates. So we're talking like 1989, 1990. And so I started doing that, and I just got involved with Rollerblade and their whole completely wild trend and push. So I ended up skating for Team Rollerblade, which was their performance team. So we were out there promoting the sport and flying around the world doing hip hop shows on inline skates. Kind of crazy time.
That's so cool. So what was the transition like So your last race as a collegiate athlete, right? You have this really transcendent experience of finding flow and really just stepping into that moment. What was that like in terms of the comparison to what racing had been like for you up until that point? And how did that show up in skating and inline and roller skating? Because they seem different yet very similar.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I'm sure a lot of your listeners that are competitive athletes or recreational athletes or just, peak performers, can relate to this. And so I think that as children, we have flow experience all the time, but we're not talking about it, right? We're just playing. And so as a competitive figure skater, as a young kid, we used to have to do something called figures. And figures were literally tracing figure eights on the ice. And we had to be very, very precise. And these figures were done before school, 6 a.m., times when you wouldn't normally do freestyle. And all of my friends hated figures. I loved figures. And I didn't know what was happening at the time, but I was training my mind. It was mental strength training because it was so precise. Well, in teenage years, we kind of lose that stuff. And I ended up running track in college and was not a super focused, really excellent runner. I was really middle of the pack as an 800 runner. And I had forgotten some of those elements that I had learned on the ice. So it was in there, but they had gone dormant, right? Our potential is really our latent abilities. We have them within us. They're just dormant. They're quiet until we tap them and access. So what happened during my last college track race was I went off on my own, really, really looking to just talk to myself and reminisce on my college track career, which was pretty mediocre at the time. And I did a couple of things, and I'm going to talk about them because they leave clues here. I went off on my own, one, solitude. I went on a slow warm-up jog, very simple rhythm, right? Rhythm, repetitive movement. I started to repeat to myself over and over again, personal best, mantra, right? Or repeating phrase. And so what happened during that time, and I just sat quietly before the race. What happened during that race, when I had shifted myself, my nervous system, into a much calmer, more coherent state before the race. And so that during the race, I was able to awaken or access the strength that I had, that I always had, but I had been too riddled with nerves and anxiety. And so back then I didn't have words to put to what had happened to me, but I knew as a 19-year-old, I was like, wow, if I could do this again, not only as an athlete, but in work and with my friends and anything I did, I knew I'd be successful. And so, hence my journey into peak performance, human potential, flow, mental strength training, meditation, yoga, all that stuff.
As you reflect on the experience of prior to that race, so as a college runner, right? And one of the things that I found so fascinating about your book, and a lot of what it feels like you really help people work through, is pointing out and labeling, bringing attention to different things that are occurring in their world that a lot of times we just take for granted, right? And as athletes, we're as guilty of that as anyone, because we do strive to find a routine so strongly that a lot of times we will fall into a routine that isn't necessarily broken down from what assumptions are actually helping us move forward, what aren't. So my question here is, when you reflect on what it felt like as a runner before that race, what were some of the characteristics you felt in preparing for races, in training and practice? Like, what was happening in your mind and in your body that was preventing that experience from occurring?
It's a great question, and you really answered it. What was happening in your mind is really the key, because as an athlete prior to that, I was really like a brain on a stick. I love that phrase. It just, brings it right to light, walking around like a brain on a stick, consumed by thought patterns, consumed with doubt, riddled with fear in a bad way, right? So I think many of us and many of the athletes I work with, we are so stuck in our heads that we're not able to access the intelligence of our bodies until we have a moment that's so off the charts like I had, where it's like, wait a second, I wasn't thinking anything during that race. And look what I did. So as a mental strength coach, I often tell that track story and I kind of draw it out, make it a little dramatic for athletes. But I use the two words, what if? What if I had known this before? What if I had trained in a way where I trusted the strength that I had more? So it's a lot of what ifs. And I think the what ifs, especially college athletes that, have a 4-year run, like I tell them, don't wait till your last game, guys, to find, this what I'm talking about here. Like, don't wait. Listen to someone who's been there. Ask the questions now. Where am I during competition? Where is my mind going? Am I doubting myself? Am I psyching myself out? Because here's the thing, Josh, you and I both know that when we're able to drop below the level of our neck and really access the strength, the intuition, the insight that's coming through us in our bodies, we kill it. We kill it. Phil Jackson knows this. It's exactly how he's coached his teams for the last couple of decades. Get them out of their head, get them out of their ego, into their body. And not only do they perform better personally, but they actually interact better as teammates.
So one of the things that comes to mind is the different levels of experience, right? And what would be, I think, really energizing for you to share is the different layers of experience, from direct to secondhand to muted. And then as athletes, what are some of the characteristics that we can point to and say, oh, okay, I'm not accessing that body intelligence that I have, and I can feel it in these kind of ways?
Yeah. So I'm kind of, I would say, obsessed with directly experiencing my life, right? Because, and I think as athletes, a lot of us are like that because we've felt we know what it feels like to be completely embodied, to be completely in the moment, to feel our heartbeat, to feel, the breath going, to feel like, to know, like even the sounds that our body makes when we're running or whatever we're doing, the way, the stick hits the puck. Like, there's so much nuance as an elite athlete that we are sensitive to. And so if we can recognize that when we are so fully engaged and dropped into our body, we are lit up. This is the sense of being fully alive. It's the sense of being in flow, right? So if we can recognize it, not only during our workouts, during our warm-ups, during our cool downs, during competition, even being in the locker room with teammates, like notice those glimpses of being alive. And it's just like, all you have to do is nod. This is one of those. Because when you can start to recognize what it feels like to be in flow, then you start to notice more quickly when you're not. So I'm kind of like, I do like the whole reverse engineering thing on like the way mindfulness is taught and everything. I like to teach people to recognize what you're already doing right. Notice what it feels like to directly experience being alive in this moment, on the field, wherever you are. And then you'll start to notice when you're pulled out and you're starting to, what I call, mute your experiences. Like we start to lessen the intensity of moments. Oh my gosh, we could do it in so many ways, but the easiest way we do that is just to get distracted, right? Jump on Facebook, right? Think about something else. Think about how much, think about the ice cream after the workout, whatever. We mute what's happening. And when we mute the experience that we're living in, we actually weaken our power because we are most powerful, right? On the verge. We are most powerful in this moment.
I think a lot of athletes, when we talk about mental strength and mental conditioning, right, there is a perception that means mental toughness in the sense of I put a wall up and I block the world out from around me, right? And while there is value in being able to kind of set the filters based on where we are in a given moment, what it feels like you're speaking to more is this idea that sometimes the strongest mental action that we can take, the strongest action our experience can take, is not blocking something off, but actually stepping into it more fully. And when you talk about that muting, what just came to mind for me is so much of that mute, especially for us as athletes, comes from us wanting to draw this wall around ourselves and not let anything else in.
So here's the thing. We all lose our train of thought. We all lose it. It's like none of us are going to be fully present all the time. And one of the things I tell the athletes that I work with all the time, I tell them that really, it's the mistakes happen when we have that 1 or 2 second loss of attention. That's when we drop the ball. That's when we trip over our own feet. Right? That's when we do stupid things in sports. It's like that one split second. So it's going to happen. It just is. But we can strengthen our capacity to stay focused more often. And I'm going to just back up on the whole mental strength thing. So 15 years ago, I started working with the Villanova football team and basketball team. And back then, nobody was doing yoga and meditation with athletes. Very, very few. In fact, the strength coach at Villanova was interviewed by Sports Illustrated. I think it was 2009. So the basketball team was going to their first Final Four. And Sports Illustrated wanted to know, what special things are you doing with your team to prepare for March Madness? And the strength coach at the time told me, he's like, I'm not telling them about you because you're our secret weapon. So back then, nobody was talking about doing mental strength training. I mean, there were certainly performance coaches back then, but, using mindfulness techniques. So when I was working with these teams, it wasn't something that was done a lot. So being a strength coach, because I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist, I thought, well, I'm just going to, instead of calling myself the physical strength coach, I'm just going to call myself the mental strength coach, because college athletes get that terminology, right? Yeah. And so that made total sense to the guys that, okay, yeah, we're going to put our yoga mats down and we're going to move our bodies, but really what we're doing is using the movement like weights to help us train our mind. But I would say, I would rephrase it nowadays to use more of a term of mental agility. Like we're becoming more supple mentally when we do mental practices, when we train ourselves, when we start to get to know what our minds are doing during competition. We start to be able to see patterns, break patterns, change patterns, and we become just more supple and agile. So that's what I would say. I'm more of a mental agility coach these days than a mental strength coach.
I love that terminology. And I agree that it's more to what probably we know now and what we experience, more, accurate to what you are helping to facilitate. And so one thing that recurs, I think, as I was doing the research for your interview, Cara, is the desire to slow down, right? To slow down. And I would love for you to share a little bit about both where your experience started with that difference of moving fast, moving slow, and then how that shows up for athletes.
Well, I'm super intrigued with the way our minds operate, especially my mind. I'm really interested in why I do the things I do, why I say the things I do, and what lands for people, and when I say things that fall flat. And so what I have recognized from my own deep dive into practice is that there's no way for me to really take a hard look at myself if my mind is speedy, frenetic, and frantic. So when I teach, especially if I'm teaching in the corporate environment, I usually go in with this snow globe. I have got this great snow globe, and I just hold the snow globe for like an hour when I'm talking. And every so often I'll shake the snow globe and I'll just hold it as a prop to help people get how busy our minds are. And when our minds are busy, it's clouded. You can't see, just like the snow globe. When I shake it up, you can't see through it. There's no clarity. Yeah. So one of the most helpful ways to help to be able to look directly at the patterns of our mind is to slow down, to get quiet, to move in rhythm, right? Like I did in my race, to find some silence, to tune inward to breath and sensory awareness. And so I'm just going to cap that off by saying, slowing down is a component. But the real issue here, and I think for a lot of people stepping into the world of meditation, they're like, okay, now I got to meditate. Like, why am I doing this? I hate this, right? How many people have you heard? I hate this. And I don't love it every day either, trust me. But if we can look at our brains, the way, and understand the way our mind or brain, I use them interchangeably, if we can look at the way our minds work and understand the way our minds work, the way we understand our smartphones, we'd be in a lot better shape. So think about your phone for a moment. Again, I work with a lot of like 20-year-olds, kids, right? So I've got to relate to them. And honestly, this analogy relates to just about all of us these days. We get these phones and they're very sophisticated. And we learn very quickly where the settings are, how to work the apps, how the battery gets drained, when it needs to get plugged in, when it needs to shut down, right? We know so much about the apps and how to make it brighter and lower and faster and slower. And if we would give ourselves that same attention and start to recognize that we are conditioned mentally through life experience and through sport to do things a certain way, to think things in a certain way, to fear in a certain way, to doubt ourselves in a certain way. And it's just like our phones, we're running apps all day long. I'm really good with the doubting app. I've gotten really good at that, right? And you may have an anger app or an anxiety app or something else that's more prevalent. And when we can just start to look at those apps and get curious about them, we can start to change those patterns. And some of those apps, we just might need to delete them. And until we slow down and get curious about our minds, we're going to stand no chance of doing that. The instrument will just take us over and do whatever it wants in competition or other challenging situations.
So the question that comes to mind then is what sparked the journey or pursuit for you towards understanding not just your mind, but Cara, you do this amazing, you're able to put these things almost, you bring them into a three-dimensional reality, right? Things that we talk about, emotions, ideas, concepts, we bring them into a three-dimensional reality where we can touch and feel them much more tangibly. So where did that come from for you? And what kind of started you on that journey to say, I need to learn more about what's happening in my head?
Yeah, I think for me, I've been moving my body. I mean, we all have, hopefully, but I've been teaching movement since I was 15. Yeah. At 15 years old, I had to turn professional as a skater, a figure skater, because I needed to pay for my skating. So I went from amateur. Back then, you actually signed papers. You went from amateur to pro. And so I started teaching adults how to figure skate at 15. And so for my whole life, I've been teaching some kind of movement. And I think in doing that, it has enabled me to not just speak at minds, but to speak to the nervous system of bodies. And so in speaking to your nervous system, I can hopefully, skillfully be able to help facilitate an experience. So when I go to teach movement, I really could care less about, calorie burn, or actually, I don't really care. I shouldn't say that. I mean, it's not about caring. My main goal when I teach any kind of movement is to help facilitate an experience of flow. I want to help guide your mind so deep into your body that you feel so fully alive and so awake to what you're doing and what's happening inside and around you, that it leaves a marking, a lasting mark. It's like, when we're in flow, we feel great. It may not be a great situation, but we feel great. So to answer your question, I hope, is it's been decades of personal intrigue as to how to not miss a moment of my life, how to show up fully for everything I do, whether it's parenting my kids or teaching in a corporate setting or teaching 90 football players. It's like, how can I just be all in this moment? And so I've been my own living experiment in a way, sort of like Tim Ferriss. I mean, I love Tim Ferriss for that reason, is he's just his own living experiment,
So that did answer my question. And I think the next piece of it that's really interesting is what you said about being able to speak directly to the body, to these different senses, right? And I think sometimes as a coach, I taught martial arts for 15 years, right? And very often would struggle to find language for what you just communicated, which was, how do I speak to not somebody's head? How do I speak to their body? What have you found to be successful in creating that bridge?
Oh, I love this conversation. So one of my favorite things to talk about is cueing. Are the words that we use and how the words work or don't work. So I've had a yoga meditation center for 15 years, and so I've trained a lot of yoga teachers. And I'm a very different type of yoga teacher. I'm not I'm not necessarily your like feel good kind of let's all, love each other yoga teacher. I come in, I don't even look at faces. So when I'm moving a room of, 30 people in a yoga class, I'm looking at feet, legs, arms, shoulders, necks, spines, hips. Right. And I'm speaking directly to those body parts to move them. And so this is what happens. And I think this could be really helpful for coaches out there as well. The more we can speak to the nervous system of the people that we're coaching and less to the mind, the more it's going to be an embodied cognition as opposed to something that has to be thought about and then deciphered in the body. So I'm just going to use the Villanova football team as an example, because on Sunday nights I come in during season, 90 guys, whether they lost or won, I got to see them. And they put their mats down, they lay down. Now, I could say everything that I'm going to say to them about whether it's wipe the slate clean and let's refocus for the week ahead, or carry what you learned from that game and integrate it, and now let's move on. Whatever theme the other coaches give me to work with, sure. I use movement to help them drop out of this, right? Because whether we won or we lost, we're going to carry some story with us, right? And so the story's gone. Let's use what we learned and let's move from there. So as a coach and this could work perhaps during warm-up. One of the best things we can do for athletes, because they're so used to being in their body, is to get them moving in some capacity, whether it be just even a walking warm-up, like a dynamic walking warm-up, and then talking to them. Instead of them sitting there, cross-legged, uncomfortable because their hips hurt or they can't, cross their legs, or they're leaning on their arm and their shoulder hurts, instead of just talking at them, move them. And as you're moving them, get those messages inside, because those messages will drop right into their physical embodied cognition, their physical knowing, as opposed to just something they have to stream in their mind.
It seems like what the visual that's coming to mind for me, and I'll share this just to maybe help both provide our listeners context, but also I'd love to hear if I'm perceiving this right. So often when we talk to somebody, especially as a coach or a leader, we talk to somebody and we think that they have to understand here before their body's connected. So it's like it's a domino, right? We try to think of it in dominoes, and we think I have to get their head to get it, and then the rest will fall. And what it sounds like you're saying, Cara, and it feels much more natural is to say we can just go right past that domino. We don't need to start there. We can start right at a place where we know it will be experienced in a much different way.
Yeah, hallelujah. You're spot on. And so I'm going to throw out a little some stats out, and this is what gets me so jazzed. And not only as teaching athletes, but in teaching people and teaching CEOs and teaching, really busy people who feel like I just can't possibly, contain everything I have to contain in my mind or really show up in the way I want to show up. So it's all about, peak performance, right? We want to be in peak performance for our lives.
Yeah.
So our thinking mind, or our cognitive mind, can process between 50 and 150 bits of information per second. Okay. Like, I don't really know what that means, like the whole bits of information, but just like stay with me for a moment and think about these numbers. So whatever's happening in the moment, I can think about 50 to 150 bits of information per second. Now, if you drop below the neck, so to speak, so you're not in your cognitive mind, but now you're in your senses, in your sensory perception, or in the physical knowing of what's happening. Can you guess? I'm gonna put this back on you, Josh. Can you guess how many bits of information per second you will process?
So I'm going to cheat a little bit, because I heard you mention this in a previous interview, and I'm trying to remember. Was it like 10,000 bits?
Oh, 12 million bits.
Wow.
I don't know how they came up with this.
Wow.
But let's just say it is so enormously different.
Yeah.
When we can drop below the thinking, we access information and intelligence, both from our inner and our outer environment, that is so profound, we can't help but perform at our highest level. So I want to bring us back to Phil Jackson, because I've studied him quite deeply. And I've also had the great pleasure of speaking with George Mumford a couple of times, who was really his mindfulness teacher. I mean, George was the one that worked with a lot of the players, the Kobes and the Michaels and the others during these heydays of Phil Jackson. Well, I know that during the time of the Bulls, Phil Jackson would have his team in the locker room pregame in the dark. Nothing happening, no, sensory deprivation in some respects, breathing together. So they were synchronizing their breath. They were coming into a state of coherence, not only individually, but group. And coherence, for those of you listening, is really, it's just a state of harmony, where our brain waves and our heart waves and our nervous system, everything is just kind of flowing, right? Back to the word flow.
Yeah.
And so when they stepped out on that court, he would remind them they were one mind. And so they didn't have to think about where their teammates were. All they needed to do was to trust that physically their senses, their sensory awareness would be able to know who was behind, who was moving left, where they were in space with one another. And I mean, the rest is history, 11 rings later, right?
What comes to mind, number one, is that number is just astronomical in reference to what our brain can compute, right? And really energizing, because I think as athletes, even if we don't cognitively understand that, we know it, right? That's the beauty of sport, is especially when we are fortunate enough to compete in a sport for an extended period of time. We learn just how, even in these moments that are our pockets, right? These states. The question I want to ask is, why is that body intelligence important beyond sport?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a difference in everything. And this is a field of study that is not well known right now. It's so interesting because I think it had to have been, I have to tell you, my daughter is now 24. And when she was 9 months old, the kid started like running. And I was like, holy crap. Oh my God, this kid is like so coordinated, right? And she ended up playing Division I soccer. So, I mean, she was a really phenomenal athlete. But as a young kid, she just had a incredible dexterity. And I remember looking up back then physical intelligence, because we were talking about multiple intelligences. And I found nothing. I mean, I found like 2 lines, I think, in Howard Gardner's book on multiple intelligences. And so just now we're starting to learn more. So, as we move from mindfulness and all the research done on the brain to emotional intelligence, right? And how we are able to emote and regulate emotions, and what that's doing for just our quality of life and our performance, to social intelligence. We're kind of on the verge. Sorry, I had to do that. Of understanding embodied cognition, our ability to know where we are, what's happening in our bodies, and not only our bodies, but I think it's called interoception. There's a great professor out there, Guy Claxton, in England, and he talks about embodied cognition quite a bit. I watch his stuff on YouTube. So we are able to then intuit and sense more deeply what someone else is feeling. What is the right action in this moment? When to lean in, when to pull back. And I mean, that could only benefit everybody in the workspace.
It's so natural. And I think it's something that we all are constantly in situations where this can come to bear, right? And what I think about as you were saying that is that interactions where we feel tension, right? Where we say something that creates tension, where we do something that creates tension. One of the natural responses is to begin processing cognitively what just happened. What am I doing? There's just this flood of data. And I'll share this just because the other day I had an interaction that created tension immediately. And my brain just starts going crazy. There's all this information. But then I paused and I kind of tried to pull back. And what I think you're speaking to too, Karen, and what I'd love for you to share your perspective on, is that ability to say, how can I pull away from the flood of data that's in my head and just step back and feel what the moment, the environment is telling me?
Yeah, such a great conversation. I mean, this is so exciting. Yes. So I'm going to say yes. And it's trainable.
Yeah.
This is what's so exciting, especially for those of us who've been athletes who know how to train our bodies. We can train ourselves to become more sensitive to exactly what's happening in the moment. So yeah, I mean, most of us were in conversation, and I have to practice this as well during an interview, is to really listen to you and what you're saying and what your question is before formulating a response, right? We all do it.
Right.
But we can catch ourselves. Again, that's just an app, right? Yeah. It's just an app that we run. Let's decide what we're going to say before the person stops talking, right? we can delete that app actually, but we can do that as well by sensing into what's happening. And so here's the big misperception for a lot of people is that it happens without words. And can we trust the language of our body without putting words to it?
Yeah.
Right? Because our body speaks to us through the language of sensation. And one of the great things about contemplative movement practices, such as a really solid yoga practice, and I say really solid because there's a lot of entertainment out there. Like we're being entertained in the yoga world now. So, and that's fun sometimes, but if you really want to do serious training, then you want a contemplative yoga practice. And what I mean by that is just, simple, steady. It has some integrity, some silence. It's giving you space to really feel. Tai Chi, Qigong, there's those, and even like Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, there's great physical practices that can allow us to start to get very subtle on sensations, just like you would practice free throws. It's like, if you lean left or lean right or forward or back, or you pitch this way or not. Like we as athletes, we're constantly tuning the guitar, and we can tune our inner guitar so that we can become very skillful in knowing. And so just bringing this into real life, into a real life meeting, business meeting, I can sit and really listen to you and sense what my body's sensing without trying to put words to it, and trust that my intelligence below my neck, 12 million bits, is going to know so much more about what to say or not say than this little slow turtle up here, 50 to 150 bits of information.
It's so powerful and brings so much to the surface around, I think, as we said, what athletes understand, right? And so I have one more question before I'll ask my final question. So I feel like I can keep asking these questions forever, Cara. So I'm going to try to temper my enthusiasm here. I
love it.
The question or statement that's really intriguing to me is the idea of sensations as a form of language. And I think we are so quick to perceive language as a very narrow description of either I speak language, I write language, or my body does, I have sign language, right? But thinking of sensation as a form of language between what I'm experiencing and my internal world is, I think, new to a lot of athletes and coaches. And it's really energizing to have that framework.
Yeah. So if I look back at 19 years old, when I had this extraordinary experience where I remember it to the T, I remember the smell of the air and the sky and the track. I remember so much of it. I didn't have words. I had nothing to go on. Flow, the book by Csikszentmihalyi hadn't been written. There was no internet to speak of. There was no information. All I could go on is what I remember feeling in my body. And so from that moment forward, I just kept trying to recreate it in different ways. Right. So I was like, just walking around like, does this work? Does this work? I bungee jumped. I walked on coals with Tony Robbins. I tried everything. Now we have so much more at our fingertips, which is great, but maybe is not so great in some respects because we're looking for the words to tell us as opposed to going to the direct experience of our bodies. Right. And so I want to tell you that probably this entire interview, and this doesn't always happen, I've had the hair on my arms has been standing up straight, right? Because I feel your excitement. You're in the space. You've got great questions. There's great flow to our dialogue. I'm really sensing my body. I'm not thinking. And that doesn't always happen. I'm not just always walking around in flow, right?
Yeah.
So I what I believe in my own experience, and again, we're kind of light on the science still, but it's coming, is that we will be able to read our sensations like we read a book. And we can become that subtle and that intelligent. And I know Josh Waitzkin, the chess player, who's been interviewed on Ferris, he's got a great book, The Art of Learning. He is one of these real physical intellects, I should say. I just kind of made that up. I don't even know if that's a real thing.
We'll take it.
We'll take it. He is, because he's studied martial arts as well. And he's gotten very down deep into the subtleties of the body and sensation. And I will bet you that when we can actually measure this stuff, that if we could take a Navy SEAL, we could take a pro basketball player or an Olympic skier and put them through some tests. And I bet you, we will find this extraordinary physical intelligence capacity without them like haven't even been able to explain the way we're talking. They just got it. That's all.
In one of our first conversations, I remember, we had a similar thread that got pulled around athletic intelligence, physical intelligence, bodily intelligence. And what is super energizing to me is even just now in this conversation, you're creating a framework for us to explore this further, which is so cool because it seems like in a positive way, a 10,000-pound gorilla that is sitting here within our culture, right, within our world, that maybe is not yet understood or realized for the value it can have on human beings, on just the experience we have in life.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I'm really passionate about this because I feel like it's right here. Like that's what I tell people. It's right here. And it's breath. It's sensory awareness. It's some stillness and silence, great mindfulness practice. It's moving, simple movement, not for the sake of, working out, but we're ambulatory beings that need to move. So just movement. Any one of these gateways can bring us in to allow us to explore the extraordinary intelligence that's within every single one of us. And so why not now? Like, why not put your phone down and start looking at the apps that you're running, how you're running them, physical, mental, emotional, social apps, the things that are constantly weighing you down and holding you back. Look at those suckers, get curious about them. And as soon as we start to look at them, and that's what mindfulness is, it's a noticing, it's a paying attention to. When we start to notice them, we start to break down the thickness of these deep grooves that are not supporting us. And this is how we transform. This is how we start to change from within.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So before I ask my final question here, Cara, where can these guys go to connect with you online?
All right. So carabradley.net. It's kind of the hub for a lot of my work. I have a podcast, a weekly podcast, just like you, Josh, but I don't do interviews. It's not an interview based. It's just me going off for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes every week on a specific subject. A lot of the stuff that we talked about, I'll talk about. I have a lot of fun with that. It's called On The Verge. And so YouTube, social media, I'm all there. But if you just go to my website first, it's where you'll find most of my stuff. My business as well is called Verge BodyMind. And if I could, for a moment, Josh, just leave the listeners with what the Verge means, because I think it really sums up why I do what I do. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
All right. So just real quick is I've always been this human potential junkie, as we've been talking about, super, super interested in peak performance. Well, just when I was married, my husband went down to the Amazon and spent a few weeks with an indigenous community. And when he came back, he was just talking to me about some of his activities. And he told me about a daily activity. When they'd go down the river, they'd stop at these specific spots of land where two rivers would meet. The tributaries came together, and the edge of the land there is where the indigenous people revered as sacred, and they would stop and pause and break there. Well, that area, those areas are called the Verge. These spots of land where rivers converge is called the Verge. And research shows that wildlife and plant life are at their most diverse on the Verge. So there on the Verge, something is happening in the ecosystems where life is thriving. So my whole life has been in pursuit of finding places, practices, things that we do where we thrive as human beings. So the Verge is such a place. I created my business called Verge BodyMind. But more importantly, and what I write about in my book, is that the place that is always available to every single one of us where we thrive the most is this present moment. And when we can learn to show up, to wake up and show up right here, right now, fully engaged and fully participating in this moment with body, mind, heart, everything we got, we thrive. There it is. Yeah. And that's what the Verge is.
Wow. Thank you, Cara. I think not just as a context for people as to where your work has been focused, but just as a principle to understand why that intersection can be so powerful, right, in this present moment. Wow. Okay, so our final question, and I feel my brain racing because there are more things that are pinging and going. So I'm trying to corral my thoughts. Our final question, Cara, we call this show Omni Athlete, and the reason being we want to understand what it means to be a mind, body, and spirit competitor. So the final question for you is, what does the words Omni Athlete mean to you?
It's fully integrated from the nervous system to the mechanics of the muscles and the skeletal system to the heart system and our capacity to know how to connect with ourselves and with our environment, and also from our head, because our brains and our thoughts and our cognitive ability is incredibly useful as well. And when all those systems come online and integrate, we are on fire.
Wow. Thank you, Cara. Thank you for being on the show. Guys, I cannot recommend diving into Cara's world enough. Go get her book, go online, watch the videos, listen to her podcast. What you will realize so quickly, one, is that this information, this portal, so to speak, is so accessible and attainable for athletes. It's not even funny. It's just right there for all of us. And as athletes, as coaches, you guys are so much further along in the path and progression to being able to grab these tools that when you are exposed to somebody like Cara, you have a responsibility to dive in there and actually grab them, because they will change your life, and you will be able to truly not just achieve peak performance in your sport, in whatever you're competing in, but also in your life as a larger whole, and really access that physical intelligence we talked about today. So go check her out, go online, reach out, share what you're going through, and just consume as much of the content as she puts out as you possibly can. And until next time, guys, thanks. What is up, Omni Athletes? Thank you guys for watching another episode of Omni Athlete. If this content is adding value to your lives, guys, please like and share and subscribe in every way you can. Share our content. That helps us grow this community, which is really ultimately what we are after right now. So please like, comment, share, tell your friends about what we're doing. If it's adding value, please share it. And if it's not, tell us so we can really improve this content to make sure it's something that you guys want and want to see. Coming up, guys, in July, I'm super excited to announce we have the 2018 Sports, Energy, and Consciousness Festival. It's going to be in San Rafael, California. This is an absolutely incredible event for a lot of reasons. The main one being you get to actually engage with so many of the people that we've had on the show, so many of the leaders in sports, energy, and consciousness. The speakers are absolutely incredible, and the community is even more incredible. So I cannot encourage you guys enough. Get to this festival. It is going to be an experience that transforms your vision of athletics, your ability to achieve peak performance, to find flow, to awaken an expanded level of consciousness in your performance that you just cannot find anywhere else. It's truly the tip of the iceberg, and you guys want to be part of it. July 13th through 15th in San Rafael, California. Go to sportsenergyfestival.com to get your tickets today before they run out. It's going to go quick, guys. Get there. sportsenergyfestival.com, July 13th through 15th. We'll see you there.